Good morning, guys. Welcome to my unboxing and review of the high-grade G-Line Standard Armor. This is a 2024 P-Bandai exclusive release that I got for $39, which is really expensive for a high-grade. That's in the realm of things like the high-grade Calrea or Zagaxi Freedom version. And that is more expensive than the last time this kit released last year, when people were also complaining about the price when it was like $35, $36. But from what I've only heard good things about this kit. I'm super looking forward to it, and I really do hope that it will live up to that price tag in terms of quality, and from what I've heard, I expect that it will. So the G-Line is of course going to be the super premium GIM, I guess. It is really living up to what the GIM could never do, which is be a mass-produced grunt that matches the performance of the original RX-78-2. So it also comes with a whole bunch of different armor configurations. Last year we got the standard armor. This year we got the light armor. I didn't take a look at it because I'm not that into the light armor configuration. I don't really like how it looks, but there are also some extra configurations. There's like a heavy armor, there's like a high-speed assault armor, and then there's one that combines everything. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those kits in the future, presumably if they continue this pace of releasing one configuration per year. And I really do love how this kit looks. As many of you may know, I really love the design of the GIM or any grunt suit with a visor in general, and I love full armor configurations of kits. This combines both of them, and I'm really expecting this to be my favorite grunt kit I've ever built. I really do have high expectations for this, and I hope that it lives up to them. Of course, it's going to be a very standard P-Bandai style box where there's no information on the side, and what would be some pretty nice box art of this, well, I guess this CG render of the G-Line standard armor, or a photo or something on the front, and then here having it firing off the Gatling smashers is kind of ruined a little bit by it being in this monochrome blue, which is the main armor tone of the standard armor add-on. So let's get right into it. Inside the box we will get 4 bags of runners, which is honestly a little less than I was expecting, but I do suspect that they are kind of min-maxing this kit in terms of what exactly you get out of the parts count, very similar to things like the D Gundam First or a lot of the Witcher Mercury kits. And then of course you will be getting this standard P-Bandai style manual, all in black and white, no art or anything on the front, with your parts list here, which does look quite a bit for a high grade, with a lot of the runners being a lot larger than you would normally see for having this many runners in the box. And then on the back here, well, we get right into the build, showing off the simplified order of assembly here, where you first build the G-Line, then mount all the armor onto it, and then mount the Gatling smashers onto it. And then building the weapons here, which consists of your standard sword, board, and beam rifle. So it looks like this is going to be a top-down construction. You're going to be starting with the head, which looks pretty nice with a lot of different parts layering here. Of course, the main assembly is going to be 2 halves sandwiched together, but the head crest itself is going to be a different part, so you're going to avoid a nasty seam line running down the middle. And in a lot of kits, that seam line that would be on the back of the head is disguised as a detail line. So I suspect they did that here. Then of course you mount a forehead crest and then 2 different details on the sides for color, for a splash of color. Getting to the body, then it does look like there's going to be plenty of parts layering here, which is going to look and build quite nicely. And then you get to the arms, which isn't going to have a complete inner frame, but should still be a pretty nice build nonetheless. Then you get into your hands. Doesn't look like you're going to have too many hand options in this kit, but again, it's a high grade. I don't think anyone's expecting anything too crazy. Then you get into your feet, some more very nice armor layering. Then you build up your legs. Looks like it's going to be a mostly complete inner frame and the legs, which is nice. And then you build up your waist here. Again, nothing too crazy, just looks like it's going to be a nice quality build. And then it looks like you're going to have 2 different options for your backpack, whether or not you want to build the standard backpack or the high mobility type backpack. I'm probably going to build the high mobility type just because it looks more interesting. And of course, talking about mounting the G-Line standard onto an action base, I will show off the standard before mounting up all the armor, of course, very similar to what I did with the dual blitz last week. Then you build up your standard armor here, which again looks very similar to the dual blitz in terms of building up some very simple armor parts individually, and then you just kind of layer them on afterwards. Yeah, then you continue to build up your armor parts. Then you replace the chest armor with some new parts for the armor. Yeah, then you mount it onto the legs, then the side skirts and the front skirts. Okay, so I may just build the standard backpack because it looks like for the G-Line standard armor, you will have to replace it with the high mobility backpack. So I'll probably build the standard backpack to show it off in standard configuration and then replace with high mobility backpack when I mount the armor. And of course, talking about mounting your Gatling smashers here with a what looks like a big backpack shroud that's going to go over your standard backpack, which will look really cool. And then you get into your weapons, which look fairly simple compared to everything else. And then your very nice shield there. And then talking about some articulation gimmicks for the legs to increase your range of movement, to presumably give a more fuller knee bend by lowering the leg armor down a little bit. And then your color guide here, text only in both English and Japanese. So this does look like it is going to be shaping up to be a very high quality, high grade build, which was what I was expecting going into this, and I expect this to look incredible when I'm done with the build. So getting into the contents of the bags. So inside the box, you're going to be getting 12 runners, which is more than usual for a high grade, but again, you are going to be mounting a big set of armor onto it, so you are essentially building like 1 1/3 to 1.5 kits in this box. In addition, you will be getting this color correcting sticker sheet, which does contain some of the usual suspects. So you have this gray, black, and metallic blue sticker here for the eyes underneath the visor. You have a part for the head camera there. You have a part for, I think the Federation V is going to go on the crotch. And then you have some color correcting parts here, some blue circles, and some gray parts here with a black void detail, presumably for some ventilation in like the skirts or something. I don't know exactly where these are going to go. As for the runners themselves, so apart from your Beam Saber runner, these runners are going to be all new for the G-Line standard armor, which is a reason why it's so unfortunate this was limited to a P-Bandai release. This is an entirely new mold, a wholly unique kit, which is a shame that it is limited to people with access to P-Bandai or people being forced to pay scalpers, which is always a shame. So starting with runner A here, these runners were printed in May of 2025. Starting with runner A here, a multicolor runner coming in 4 different colors. You have this light gray here for a number of different parts for things like the inner part of the torso, the back of the torso, the main frame part for your shield, some accent parts here. You will be getting clear blue down here for your visor and the head. You'll be getting red up here for a number of accent parts, including the front of the crotch with that Federation V that you need to sticker over, and some accent parts here. We'll also be getting yellow for a number of different accent and ventilation parts in things like the chest. We'll also be getting the Federation cross that will go on the shield, and a part here, I believe, for like the scope for the rifle or something like that. Runners B1 and B2, with this section here being cloned between the two in white, going to be the main armor tone of this kit, containing a number of different armor parts for things like the legs, the shoulders, the waist, the torso. You see parts for the feet, you see the beam sabers here, parts for the arms, and you see parts for the head down here. Runners C1 and C2, with this section being shared between them, going to be in a very dark gray for many of the frame parts seen throughout the kit. You'll be getting runners D1 and D2 for the main accent armor tone of this kit, being a kind of almost Titans dark navy blue, although not quite as, I guess, saturated or bold as that. This is significantly more faded. Going to contain a number of armor parts for the standard G-line for things like the backpack, the skirts down here, parts for the feet, the legs, the torso, the kind of border parts for the Gatling Smasher, some parts for, I believe, the backpack of the Gatling Smasher, etc. Runner E1 in this dark primer gray, almost gunmetal color. I don't know how it comes off on camera. There's a like slight brown tint to it. I don't know if my eyes are playing tricks on me, but it does look like this is going to be in a slight gunmetal color. Going to be parts for our backpack, both our standard and our high mobility type backpacks, and you will be getting all the parts for the rifle here. Runner F1 in white, going to contain the main white part of the shield. This part here that I believe goes on the head. I don't exactly remember. And then you have these parts here that are going to be going on the enhanced like backpack shroud thing that the Gatling Smasher uses. And then runners G1 and G2 in this very bright blue color here, going to be parts entirely for the standard armor that you will mount on top of the G-line when you have it configured in standard armor mode. So this is going to just kind of layer very nicely onto the armor that's already there, and it will look quite good, I imagine. And last but not least, we will be getting the Venerable Runner SP13 for a pair of standard 1/144th scale Beam Saber effect parts in clear pink. So, with all the runners out of the way, that looks like it's going to lead to a very nice build. I will see you after that build with the G-Line No Armor. Alright, welcome back. Here's the high-grade G-Line, no armor. This is just the base form. Snap-built, panel-lined, well, what panel lining opportunities there were, because a lot of the detail in this kit is through geometric variation rather than surface detail panel lines, and lightly painted, but we'll talk about that in the color accuracy section. So, before we get started, I'm going to handle this very similarly to the high-grade Dual Blitz video that I did probably like last week at this point, maybe a couple weeks ago, where I'm going to talk about just the G-Line without its armor fairly quickly, at least relatively to how long I usually take in these videos. Armor it up, and then have a posing section where overall, like, I combine poses from both the base form, only a couple for this kit because I don't think it's unique enough to warrant having a ton of poses, and the standard armor just all together in one big section. So, getting into the build, because, well, the armor is extremely simple, so there's not really a reason to talk about the build for that, but for the G-Line itself, it's very similar to something like the D Gundam First or the high-grade Dual Blitz Gundam, where It is pretty much very emblematic of what Bandai wants to do with the modern high-grade line, where the exterior has an absolute ton of detail layering and things like that. It feels very complete. It feels incredibly nice with all this color separation and parts layering and things like that. While the inner frame is relatively limited, particularly in the torso and arms, you do have a very incomplete inner frame, but what is there allows for an incredible range of motion, a ton of articulation, and really just enhances what the model is capable of in general. This kit has an incredible amount of articulation, as you'll see in the articulation section, and its posing potential is incredibly high. I'm very impressed with what this kit is capable of doing with its posing because of how nice that inner frame is. So yeah, not really much to say besides that. The build is incredibly pleasant. The armor is very simple, so there's not really much reason to talk about that. Most of the armor pieces are a couple of pieces put together, if that, but there is still a decent amount of layering on it, although not enough to save it from plenty of the color accuracy issues it has, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that once we get into the armored form later on in the video. But snapping back to the standard base G-line here, talking about aesthetics now, like I said, there really wasn't much to talk about in terms of the build. I would be covering a ton of the same points that I would be talking about the Dual Blitz Gundam, so if you want to hear like a full in-depth, like a ton of thoughts about that, go check out that video. Getting into aesthetics then, talking about color accuracy first before getting into my opinions on the design as per usual. Starting as usual with the color correcting stickers, I'm only going to be talking about the few that I used on the base that are used on the base G-line here, and I did use all of them. So sticker 1 is going to be the dual eye sticker underneath the clear visor piece here. Kind of hard to see with how recessed it is and with how dark the actual like sticker is behind it. It was mostly in gray with a little bit of blue, but it is pretty hard to see behind that visor, but it's there. Sticker 2 is going to be a tiny metallic blue square for the rear head camera there, and sticker 3 is going to be this yellow sticker for the V in the crotch because it is a very small detail, and of course it is not color separated. This whole red thing is just one piece underneath this white armor bit. So while it is a bit of a shame that this is a kind of fold over sticker that you do need to apply yourself, once you get it in there, it actually doesn't look that bad. So if you want to paint it, you can. If you don't want to, it does look all right unpainted. Now for the details on just the base G-line itself that are not color accurate, there are only a few, and they're rather small details that I don't necessarily blame this kit for not having color accurate, except for one. The armor is significantly more egregious in this regard. Also, in addition, I forgot to mention this earlier, but this kit does come with two different backpacks to configure it with, the standard style backpack here and the high mobility type backpack with different thrusters. So the way I'm going to handle it is for this base G-line here that you're seeing right now, and in the posing section, I will have the standard backpack. After having the standard armor mounted, I'm going to have the high mobility backpack mounted, and then for some of the poses, I will have the Gatling Smasher mounted with its own backpack shroud with the propellant tank / stabilizer things. Anyway, getting to the parts of this kit that are not color accurate, you need to paint in yourself. In the head here, you can see here this little divot where the Vulcan guns go that are very nicely color separated. The divot itself needs to be in yellow. That is not separated. It's just part of this white piece here on the front of the forehead, so I painted that in standard Gundam yellow. In the thrusters then, the insides of the thrusters need to be in yellow. Apparently the insides of these tiny center thrusters as well also need to be in yellow, but I did like how it looked here with just the outside in yellow, so I did not paint the inside. And this is the part that I'm a little disappointed it wasn't color separated out of the box for how nice I'd heard this high grade was. It's going to mean the legs with all of these sub thrusters here in the side of the leg armor needing to be in gray. I use seed gray. Now this very easily could have been part separated. We've seen it with things like the D Gundam First, where you have a gray part underneath this armor piece to kind of bulk up the armor of the leg with these two details that would poke through these holes in the white armor. Having this whole thing being just one piece is a tad bit disappointing, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. You just put like a drop of gray paint there, it'll flow in around the circle, and you clean off the excess, it's fine. It's not that big a deal, but it's just a little bit annoying where it didn't necessarily have to be. In terms of my opinions on this design, I actually really do like the G-line. Having it being developed from both the Full Armor Gundam, which is one of my favorite one-year war Gundams, I absolutely love the Full Armor Gundam, and having it be essentially the perfected idea of what the GM was supposed to be, which was a mass production Gundam that didn't sacrifice on performance, is also really cool. Unfortunately, aesthetically, I think without the armor, it looks a little bit awkward. This design was very clearly meant to have the armor on at pretty much all times, only purging it in extreme emergencies when the armor is very heavily damaged and isn't really doing anything anyway, just weighing the mobile suit down. But you can really see it in terms of the waist here without the skirts, with these kind of awkward frame parts just kind of hanging off the sides. We're very clearly supposed to be mounting side skirt armor from the standard armor set. The lack of skirt armor exposing this top of the frame here, also looking very awkward, these very tiny skirt things, also not looking the greatest. In addition, the very thin arms, especially at the top here with the basic shoulders, also look a little bit awkward, especially in comparison to the thickness of both the torso and the waist. As you look here, the torso does jut out quite far, and the torso has a ton of different part separation and things like that, which really contrasts with the very basic arms and legs, and the crotch in particular extends way far out from the legs, which also looks very awkward without any kind of skirt armor. So while I do love how the G-line looks, particularly the head, as you may know, I am a sucker for Federation visor suits, the overall proportions of the base G-line without any armor look a little bit awkward to me. It definitely looks a lot more complete with the armor on, and I think almost no one's going to be displaying this kit as just the base G-line because, well, of how much it costs. If you're paying for a ton, you're paying for the armor and everything, you're probably going to want to get your money's worth and display this kit with the armor. So for a quick size comparison, here's the high-grade G-line, no armor, right next to a standard-sized high-grade being the high-grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. So as you can see here, the G-line in universe is going to stand at like a little over 19 meters tall, which means in the real world it will stand maybe like a centimeter, half an inch taller than your standard high-grade. So just note that it will take up a tiny bit more vertical space on your shelf than your typical high-grade, but because this kit doesn't really get anything insane in terms of accessories or anything, it will take up pretty much average high-grade space once you get into a cool pose. So I won't be talking about accessories in this section because the accessories you can use between the unarmored form and the armored form are basically identical, with the only difference being, well, in the unarmored form, you have all the armor just out and about. So I will be covering all of the accessories in the armored state in a bit, but let's talk about articulation now. So I think the way I'm going to handle this is I'm going to go through the full suite of articulation in the unarmored form, because, well, you're going to be seeing a lot less of it than the armored form in this video. And then in the armored form, I will quickly go over the articulation that is different from the base form. And the articulation, as I mentioned earlier, is quite excellent for the G-line. So let's start with the head. For an upward look, you can get a surprisingly very nice upward look. Normally, this is where a lot of high grades falter in getting the head to actually look upwards. So you can have some verticality in your posing and aiming and fire at an upward target, or pose the kit flying upwards. This is quite nice. You can, of course, look down into your own chest. You get some fairly decent side-to-side tilt, but nothing crazy. And of course, you can 360 the head around the ball joint. The neck is also on a hinge, allowing for some more natural articulation. In the shoulders then, for a shoulder swing, you get a very nice nearly 90-degree shoulder swing. This should be more than you could ever want for any kind of pose. You do get a very minor backwards shoulder swing. The top of the armor here can open up and move independently of the arm to facilitate just over a 90-degree side raise. The arm can 360 in its socket, of course. You get 2 points of rotation, one in the upper bicep there, allowing for a full 360 rotation, and one in the lower forearm, also allowing for 360 rotation. Just be careful that you don't have the elbow there colliding with anything because of how kind of thick it is. In the elbow then, a double bend will give you a full 180-degree bend, which is very nice. I suspect that will drop with the shoulder being thickened up by the standard armor because, well, the shoulder basically has no armor here. Of course, it can do a 180-degree bend. Wrist is going to be on a ball joint, which would be able to do ball joint things, but as you can see here, the ball is very deep in the cuff. The wrist has very minimal articulation, and as you can see there, I popped the back of the hand off much more easily than I could actually get the wrist to flex or bend. So your wrist articulation is going to be very limited in both the standard and in the armored up form. In the torso then, you have a bit of an articulation gimmick where you can pull the torso out to facilitate a very nice forward ab crunch, which would normally be pretty bad given the thickness of the waist and the thickness of the torso there. You also get a fairly nice backwards ab crunch, which I don't foresee being an issue even with the Gatling Smashers, because I don't think they're that heavy of an accessory, but we will see in the posing section. You also get some very nice side-to-side crunch there. You could fully 360 the torso about the ball joint that it sits on. Just be careful because it does pop off a bit easily when you do that. In the backpack then, these beam sabers sit a little bit loose in their holders, so you can rotate them side to side as necessary. And the thrusters can pivot a tiny bit, but it's nothing major or really that noticeable. In the waist then, you have basically no skirts to speak of. These front holders can rotate upwards, but I think that's mostly to mount the skirts for the standard armor. That's not really meant for articulation. Same thing for the side skirts here. In terms of your hips, in terms of your kicks then, you do have a hip swing mechanism where both the legs can swing forward like so. Facilitates some more natural posing, but in terms of your kicks, you can get a 90-degree forward kick, just under a 90-degree side kick because of the side skirt tabs are really wedging the leg down, and you can't, if you kick it out of the way, or once Once those fall off, you can get over 90 degrees, but it's not really that realistic to achieve. And for back kicks, you will get about 90 degrees. In the legs, you will get full 360 rotation in the upper thigh. A double bend in the knee will give you nearly a full 180 degree bend, which is quite nice. There is no ankle armor to speak of. There's no toe separation to speak of. So for your toe dips, you can get a pretty decent toe dip there. And for a toe raise, because you don't have any ankle armor, you can get a very nice toe raise. In terms of your side-to-side pivot, you can pivot the foot nearly 90 degrees to either side, which is really nice. And in terms of a swivel, you can 360 the foot. So a general articulation for the G-line, as I mentioned earlier, is very excellent. Really, the only down point is going to be the wrists having very minimal articulation, which will make some melee poses look a bit awkward. But apart from that, you should be able to hit pretty much any pose you could ever want with this kit in the base form. In the standard form, I don't expect articulation to get that much worse, but we will see when I mount the armor right now. All right, and here is the high-grade G-line all armored up with the standard armor, and it definitely looks a lot more complete in this form than without the armor on. Although it does look a little bit like it's wearing like a football jersey. I don't know what it is. I think it's the very colorful and big shoulders and knees, as well as the very helmet-like head without any V-fin or anything on it, but I digress. So quickly covering the build, I don't really have any footage for this because, again, like I said, in the unarmored state, the building the armor was very similar to the Dual Blitz's Assault Shroud in that it was extremely simple. Each part was at most like 3 or 4 parts, so it wouldn't have made very interesting footage to begin with, and there isn't much to talk about. It just builds together simply with some color and part separation, although it is notably lacking in certain areas, especially the Gatling Smasher, which we'll talk about in a bit. But for the most part, the actual standard armor that mounts onto the G-line, as you see it here, is fine and does the job well enough. In terms of aesthetics then, for color accuracy, so just like the base form, first we'll talk about the color correcting stickers. Again, I used all of them here. And then I will talk about the parts that are not color accurate that you need to paint in, and then I'll give my opinions on the design. So for the color correcting stickers, all of the additional ones for specifically the standard armor here are all going to be for the legs. Now, half of them are going to be covered up by these large booster units on the sides, but they are identical to the ones on the inside of the leg. So sticker 4, you get 4 of. They're going to be these navy, like Titan's blue circles. You get 1 for each side of the extra leg armor there. And then stickers 5 and 6 are going to be these wraparound stickers here in this dark gray for like little vent or sub-thruster details here on the inside of the leg. So you get 1 for each side of the leg on the bottom here. It wraps around. It doesn't look all that great, but it's such a like kind of off to the side detail that you don't really notice. And I don't think it's that big a deal to use this, to just use the stickers for the armor here. And on the outside, they are covered up by this large sub-thruster unit, and they're not visible unless you rotate it out of the way like so. So it's not really that big a deal. What is a kind of big deal then is the remaining color accuracy, because this kit, or at least the armor, is pretty color inaccurate, which was very disappointing for how many good things I'd heard about this kit. I had avoided like watching any specific reviews or anything, just to make sure that my opinions were my own and they're untainted for this video, so you genuinely hear what I think about the kit without it being influenced by other people. So I didn't look into it prior to building the kit, and I was very surprised with how color inaccurate the armor was, given how many good things I'd heard about this kit and how fantastic it was, and especially for the price, it was a little disappointing. So let's get into it really quickly. Your color inaccurate parts in the shoulders are going to be in these circles for these like sub-thrusters here for maneuvering in low gravity or zero-G environments or whatever, these little sub-thrusters to control the rotation of the unit. The yellow circles, of course, are not going to be color accurate out of the box. That I just painted with a standard yellow, like ultra fine tip Gundam marker, and I think it turned out okay. At the center, of course, you will have to shade it in black. I don't blame the kit for that. Many kits, even in the more, I guess, detailed or accurate grades, still need you to shade in these inner, like, hollow details for thrusters and things like that. So, not entirely blaming the kit for that. And of course, you will get 2 for each shoulder on either side, for a total of 4 per shoulder. In the high mobility backpack, very similar to the normal backpack, of course, the insides of the thrusters will all need to be painted in yellow. Again, used a standard yellow Gundam marker for that. In the back of the skirt here, these 2 blocks here, I used a dark yellow Gundam marker from the MSV Gundam marker set there. I think it turned out okay, although I did mess up kind of cleaning up the excess spillage. I did end up scraping the plastic quite a bit, so I patched it up with a very quick like drop of Titan's blue there. It doesn't look all that great because it didn't top coat it, so the finish is uneven, but it does the job fine, and it illustrates that, yeah, these blocks are not color accurate when they really could have been. Like, with how large these extended details are, these two really could have been separate pieces on the yellow part of the runner on runner A. On the front skirt then, these two sub-thrusters, very similar to the shoulders, need to be in yellow. They are just in the same navy blue because this is just one big piece. These two thrusters here on the back of the calf, very similar to the ones on the backpack, also need to be painted in yellow, which I did with a standard yellow Gundam marker with the ultra-fine tip. And the part that I did not paint in that I mentioned in the base form that needs to be that is not color accurate, that I think looks fine, are going to be these ventilation fins on the bottom of these thruster units on the back of the calf. All of these fins are supposed to be in yellow. I think they look fine in navy blue. I think for ventilation details and things like that, they look fine in darker colors like in blue, like in navy blue or gray, so I did not paint them in, but if you want it to be accurate, you will need to paint those in yellow. Now, most of those I don't entirely blame for being color inaccurate, especially the sub-thruster yellow details and the insides of the normal thrusters. Really, the only things that I think could have been separate details on the base armor are the fins in the lower legs that could have been a separate yellow piece that you just slot in, and the large blocks on the back skirt, which very easily could have been separate blocks that you slide in. But where things get really disappointing, in my opinion, is going to be in the Gatling Smasher. So, unfortunately, this shroud that goes over the backpack is just one big piece that is not color accurate. These blocks in the middle need to be in the same blue as the armor tone of the standard armor. I used Goof Blue from the MSV Gundam marker set, and I think it turned out okay. It's fairly close to what the standard armor looks like, so I think it turned out okay. And of course, these details wrap around the side to also need to be color accurate. And there's also a cap piece on the top of the backpack that similarly needs to be in the same blue as the armor. This middle part here, again, used a Goof Blue Gundam marker, and I think it turned out fine, but it is really disappointing that those parts on the Gatling Smasher here are not color accurate, especially given that these very easily could have been color separated. These two like blocks here would very easily be able to like wrap around this navy part as separate parts, and it still would be basically only 3 parts for the center of the shroud, which is a little disappointing that they're not color separated, especially for how much this kit costs. Like, again, you're paying about $40 for this kit if you don't get it through a scalper. So it is very disappointing that those like big swaths of the Gatling Smasher backpack shroud are not color accurate out of the box. Quickly get into my opinions on this updated form of the G-Line with the armor on. Again, I think it looks way more complete in this form, and the G-Line is very clearly designed to have armor mounted onto it. Again, it is developed based on the full armor Gundam, fully integrating the FSWS, I think that's what it's called, the system for the full weapon integrated system, or whatever it's called, to integrate modular armor packs into this design. So again, very clearly designed to have the armor, very clearly designed to have the optional armor parts mounted at pretty much all times, and it looks way more complete with it. The silhouette is much more filled out, especially in the waist. With the addition of proper skirt armor and things like that, it looks a lot more complete compared to the base form. The frame is no longer visible, leading to the removal of the weird impression of the proportions, because a lot of where the leg is obscured, so it looks like the leg ends kind of here instead of extending way upwards with the frame visible. So I think it looks a lot less awkward in that respect. In addition, the blocky aspects of the limbs are kind of removed, given that they are covered up or extended out with the various armor parts that you mount onto it. It makes the silhouette feel a lot more unique, a lot more Gundam-like, instead of just being kind of a basic, very blocky structure. And I think the thickening of the arms and legs with the extra standard armor parts definitely helps bring it in line with the thickness of both the waist and the torso, making the whole unit feel a lot more congruous, if that makes any sense. A lot more like, I can't find the word right now, but it makes the unit feel a lot more complete in a very like kind of elegant design way, which is kind of weird to say given how blocky and large the design is, but it's integrated very kind of seamlessly and completely into the unit to make it a lot more complete than normal. Again, I think the aesthetic is reminding me a bit of a football player because of the large and colorful shoulders and knees and the very helmet-like head. But apart from that, I really love the way this kit looks. I think this may be my new favorite, like at least Universal Century Grunt design, supplanting things like the Jesta. For a quick size comparison, here is the G lines with the standard armor mounted next to a standard sized high grade, being the high grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. As you can see, the armor adds pretty much no extra head height to this kit. While the shoulders do add a little bit of extra height to the sides, it is still not taller than the head, so overall this kit with the armor on will take up about as much space on your shelf as the unarmored G-Line would. So for accessories, here's the G-Line standard armor with everything it comes with. So this is a fairly basic accessory spread, all things considered, with some extra optional equipment parts to give it a little bit of extra, like, I guess, bulk to the silhouette, or just to load out slightly if you want to have like different G-Lines on your shelf, configured in different ways to make like a squad of them or something. Especially if you get like the G-Line light armor that came out this year and have it alongside this, you can have a pretty interesting set with the squad, and especially if they continue the trend blend of these kits, where next year they released like the Assault Armor, I think it's called, which is based on the Gym Striker, and then after that they released like the G-Line Full Custom or something like that. But I can definitely see them doing this like as a yearly thing on P-Bandai, and I'm very interested to see, especially if they make the Assault Armor, because I really love the Gym Striker's design. But I digress. Anyway, starting with the accessories, as per usual with our hand options, of course you will get the 2 standard high-grade holding hands that you see on the kit right now. You will get this open expressive hand that also doubles as a rifle support hand, only for the left side. It does the job fine. And you will get this trigger finger hand only for the right side. Little unfortunate, but with the way the rifle is configured, it really only makes sense to have it holding in the right hand, especially with the way the scope is aligned. It's not adjustable or anything like that, so you're pretty much going to have this trigger finger hand permanently fused to the rifle unless you steal another kit's weapon to give to this, which I don't see why you would, because the beam rifle is very unique for this kit and it fits it perfectly. Of course, you saw this backpack earlier on the Unarmored state of the G-Line. This is just the standard backpack, very reminiscent of like the RX-78-2, because again, this kit is essentially a properly mass-producible RX-78-2 that does not compromise the performance, so the backpack is going to be nearly identical in terms of aesthetic. You will of course get your 2 beam sabers as your melee options, and for your beam effects, you'll be getting these 2 standard pink beam saber beam effect parts from the SB13 Runner. We've seen these a million times, not much to say about them. And now for your main handheld weapons, or I guess elbow-mounted armament in the case of the shield here, this is a pretty unique take on the Federation shield, especially with this very small Federation cross as opposed to the extremely large one that we're accustomed to seeing on things like of course, the RX-78-2 Gundam itself and the Gym. Those two have the much larger style of Federation cross there. But this is a little bit unique, having a smaller Federation cross, having the aesthetic of like layered armor and things like that, especially with this part in the middle, which gives it a very unique, cool look that I really like. And I do think the Federation shield looks pretty good in this light gray as opposed to the normal, I guess, like striking red that it comes in, which is pretty refreshing. For your ranged handheld weapon, you will be getting this very unique beam rifle. Again, like I said earlier, it really appears like a quintessentially sci-fi like shooter video game rifle, like something you would see in Halo or Mass Effect or something like that, or I think back in the day on the PS3, I played Dust 514, which was like a first-person shooter game based on EVE Online. I remember the rifles looking pretty similar to this, so this might be why I like this design so much. I'm kind of nostalgic for it, but this is an incredibly unique rifle that has no articulation, so there's no secondary handle. The scope is not movable, it is fixed in place, but it is color separated, giving a nice splash of color with this yellow scope in the front, very reminiscent of like the RX-78-2's beam rifle. And this rifle is kind of modular, with the underbarrel part being modular here. I'm not exactly sure what these are, if these are like extra E-packs or something for the rifle, but I know the light armor has this like very bulked up with an extra like weapon module or something on the bottom. So this is a very modular rifle, and I do love the look of it. And then of course your remaining parts here are going to be optional mounted parts to add the Gatling Smasher equipment onto this kit. So of course, when you add the backpack shroud on, it will be covering up the beam saber holders on the side of whatever backpack you're using. I think the manual says you're supposed to use the high mobility backpack, but I don't know if you can use it with the standard backpack. Anyway, the beam saber holders are going to be covered, so you will get this alternate beam saber holder to mount onto the back skirt to have the beam sabers kind of sticking out on the bottom of the back skirt, very similar to something like the Gym Dominance, I believe, has the beam sabers mounted there. I don't remember if the Full Armor Gundam has them mounted there, but plenty of more like heavily armed or armored units have their beam saber holders on the back skirt. And then of course you will get this main backpack shroud and this cap piece that I showed off earlier to mount the Gatling Smasher onto the kit. So of course this will just slot onto the backpack, this will mount on top to give it a more cohesive look. And this really just does fill out the silhouette quite a bit. The Gatling Smashers look really cool. I do love these weapons, and I love the way they integrate with the standard armor there. And of course you will get these two, I guess they're just called stabilizers on the wiki, but they mention that they do increase the operating time of the unit, so I'm pretty sure these also double as propellant tanks. Very similar to something like the Sinanju, with how its propellant tanks was kind of jut out of the backpack. So you'll be seeing this in the posing section, and I will definitely be posing this kit on the shelf with this on. So of course we will quickly go through articulation then, kind of skimming over the parts that are identical to the standard armor articulation that you saw earlier in this video. So your head and torso articulation are going to be identical to the standard unarmored state of the G-Line. For your shoulders then, the shoulder, of course, very similar to the unarmored state, can rotate independently of the arm to enable a 90-degree side raise, and you do have to rotate the arm so that the elbow does not collide with the shoulder, but that is slightly worse than the just over 90-degree raise that this kit is capable of in the unarmored state. Apart from that, arm articulation is going to be identical to the unarmored state, with the exception of the double bend in the elbow, which is slightly more limited than before, but is otherwise still a nearly perfect 180 degrees. Of course, in the waist then, because the torso is identical to the standard G-Line, same thing with the backpack, the front skirts can flip up nearly 180 degrees, which is quite nice. These side skirts do tend to pop off a bit easily, don't have much articulation, so just be careful when you're handling those. They are also a little bit tricky to get back in, given how kind of wide they are and how easily they collide with the other parts of the waist, so you can get an extremely minor, maybe 15-degree raise before they will want to pop off of the frame. And the back skirts can raise up also nearly 180 degrees, just like the front skirts. In your legs then, for kicks, your front kick articulation drops to just under 90 degrees. Your side kick articulation drops to 45 degrees before you will pop the side skirt off of the frame there. And the back kick drops to slightly under 90 degrees. So your kick articulation does drop pretty significantly, unfortunately. In the knee, you are limited to a 90-degree bend unless you activate the articulation gimmick, where you can slide the lower leg down to enable a much fuller knee bend of over 90 degrees, but still nothing too crazy, nothing compared to the unarmored state. In the side of the leg then, these thruster units can rotate a full 360 degrees. This ankle armor here can pivot upwards and downwards to enable foot articulation. So, of course, your downward foot articulation is going to be identical to the unarmored state, and your upward articulation is also going to be pretty much identical, which is quite nice. Normally when you add in these armor units with extra ankle armor, your foot articulation becomes limited. And of course, your tilt and pivot articulation is going to be identical. So overall articulation does take a pretty significant hit with the armor mounted, but this kit is still capable of pulling off most poses you would want it to. So let's see the articulation in action and some poses. Alright, so getting the G-line into a bit of a spin here in the air, because before we can get into the armor, here it is in the unarmored state doing a pose with the beam sabers. So this is recreating the pose from the promo material from the Dual Blitz Gundam, with the duel kind of flying through the air, about to deliver 2 slashes to a target. This pose was used for the Dual Gundam's promo material to show off the articulation of that kit, so I decided it was a fitting pose for this kit to show off all of the articulation that this kit has, especially in the unarmored state, with how far the knee can bend, with how the torso can twist and contort and crunch, and just make it look really natural, like it's really going in, about to take out a mobile suit. This is also one of the only poses I would consider having the G-line doing without any of the armor, because like I mentioned earlier, it does look pretty awkward without the armor. This is a design that was clearly meant to exist like almost exclusively with armor on, only dropping the armor in extreme cases where it is more of a hindrance because of like excessive damage or something, where it's not really doing much protecting and is just adding weight. So having this kit in a very extreme mobile pose without the armor on with the beam sabers is really the best I think you can do with it. There's another pose later on that I'll throw up on the screen while I'm talking about the conclusion, where it's in like kind of like a desperate thing where it looks like it's making a last stand, clutching onto one beam saber with both of its hands. I think that would also work in like a diorama if you showed the armor scattered around it and you model it like weathered with like char damage and like it's broken apart. You could have a really cool display like that with just the base G-line, but if you're just doing like a basic action pose for this kit on your shelf to have it look cool, I really don't think that you would want to pose this kit with just the G-line without the armor, because especially considering the price, again, I feel like you would want to get your money's worth and pose this kit with the armor on. I think that's what most people are going to do. So while I would consider having this kit on this shelf under like maybe some different circumstances, as it is now, I really wouldn't consider posing the G-line without the armor outside of a diorama. So putting the armor on then, here's the G-line in a typical running and gunning pose. Here it is kind of twisting, firing off a little bit in front of it with the beam rifle, throwing the shield behind it, and this looks okay. It shows off a few things. One, the balance of the G-line isn't actually the greatest with how narrow the feet are. It does struggle a little bit to achieve a bit of a natural looking running pose, while the vast majority of the body looks like it's in like a pretty decent sprint going pretty quickly. The front foot, with the leg being nearly straight down, does limit that impression a little bit. I feel like it would appear a lot more natural if, again, your upward ankle articulation was maybe a little bit better. It's fine, and I think this could work in a diorama, but by itself, I really wouldn't consider posing this kit like this. I don't think it's in any danger of falling over, like it's not precarious like in the Sword Impulse Spec 2 that I took a look at last video, but having it like this isn't necessarily bringing out the fullest potential of the G-line's abilities. While it does look good in motion, I think the high mobility backpack and the general proportions, the, I guess, thinness of the limbs, even including the extra armor with how long they are, really gives this kit a more, I guess, athletic or kinetic lean, and makes it feel at home in motion. Other than that, I think it also looks great in some pretty static poses on the ground, where again you're emphasizing the longness of the legs, where you have them very spread out in a very wide-legged power stance. You'll see that when I'm talking about the conclusion, but for this running and gunning pose, this isn't really something I would consider doing on the shelf, dioramas aside. So to cover all of my bases, here is the G-line crouched, firing the beam rifle into the air two-handed with the offhand, with the open expressive hand, kind of supporting the rifle underneath the barrel there, and this looks very awkward. I'll be the first to admit this doesn't really look that great. I would not pose the G-line crouching. The issue is, without a proper hip drop, you only really have a hip swing. You can't align the legs together to have the G-line like look balanced on the ground. This looks like it's about to tip over, and quite frankly it was. It took a lot of rotating of the back leg to even get it to be this kind of stable pose to begin with. Secondly, having the rifle held two-handed, I completely forgot to show it off during the articulation section. I probably threw in a correction up on screen, but the shoulder swing with the armor on is severely limited once you mount the armor, which means that without that shoulder swing, you can't two-hand the rifle firing in front of the G-line. It needs to fire off to the side when you twist the head. This becomes a little bit awkward looking, especially in this kind of pose, and even more so when you mount the Gatling smashers. There was a pose I wanted to do near the end where the G-line's like descending from like a big leap, firing the rifle downwards two-handed while also firing the Gatling smashers downward. You can't do that because you can't align the rifle two-handed in front of the G-line. It has to be off to the side. And because the Gatling smashers don't have any rotation in them, like to the left or right, you can't align the two firing at the same target without firing the rifle one-handed, which I think looks a little bit awkward. So that limit of articulation is really the only like time where I think the G-line's articulation I found very wanting, being unable to two-hand the rifle forward. But I think there are plenty of poses that don't involve that make the G-line look quite good, and while I wouldn't consider doing this on the shelf, perhaps a modified version, like with one-handing the rifle in a defensive pose with the shield, might be doable on the shelf. So, of course, mounting the Gatling Smasher onto the G-line's backpack, here it is in a pose where it's like kind of firing the Gatling Smashers out in front of it, where it's in a wide-legged power stance to emphasize the power of the two Gatling Smashers on its shoulders, having the shield and rifle kind of off to the side to, again, emphasize that the Gatling Smashers are the core weapon being fired here, and to show off their power in this very wide stance. Now, this demonstrates a couple of things. One, I don't think the G-line looks the greatest in the air with the armor on. Like, with all these thrusters and stuff, my first impression was, you want this kit in the air, but having worked with it in a couple of different poses, I don't really believe that that's the case anymore. I think it works a lot better on the ground in a wide-legged stance, emphasizing the, I guess, agility, the athleticism of the limbs, how long they are, how far they can stretch. Very similar to the Pale Rider ground type. I think the poses that worked well on that kit also work very well on this kit. In the air, it looks a little bit awkward in a way that the Full Armor Gundam kind of didn't. I don't exactly know how to put it. It's just something is a little bit off when this kit is in the air. You can get it in some decent aerial poses, as you'll see when I'm when I'm flipping through B-roll for the conclusion section, but this really isn't it. Secondly, I don't think the Gatling Smashers are great as being used as a primary weapon to show the G-line firing it. While I do love how they look, I love the way they fill out the silhouette, I think that's what they're best at, filling out the silhouette. As the main focus for the offensive action of the G-line, I don't think they're that compelling of a weapon. I think they're just like a little bit too, I guess, undynamic. Like, they don't really complement what the G-line is capable of in terms of its posing ability. So while I do love the Gatling Smashers, I love the way that it adds to the G-line, I don't think it works great as the main focus of a pose. So maybe retooling this where the G-line's using the rifle as its main weapon, with the Gatling Smashers kind of up acting to enhance the silhouette. I think that pose works best for the G-line. That's what I'm doing on my shelf, like in a grounded pose, but I really wouldn't consider doing something like this on the shelf. So getting the G-line into the air here in a kind of melee pose with the beam saber, not much to talk about, it's a beam saber. I really wouldn't consider using this with the armor, but I decided to include it just for the sake of completeness. But, well, I'll leave this pose up while I start talking about the conclusion. So in conclusion, the G-line standard armor is a very interesting high grade that I absolutely love, but that I feel doesn't entirely justify its very premium price tag and P-Bandai limited availability. If this were a standard release, like if they released just the base G-line as a standard release and then the armor packs like separately on P-Bandai, or if they just had the standard armor be standard release and then have the other armor variants be P-Bandai, I would be much more accepting of the price tag and the limitations of this kit, but as it is, it's a little bit disappointing. In terms of the build, it is essentially like a perfect high grade. There's nearly nothing wrong with the build. The armor is a bit simple, which leads to missing parts and color separation, which we'll talk about in a moment, but in general, the armor is simple and effective in terms of its construction. For the G-line itself, it is exactly what a high grade wants to be. Lots of parts layering for the exterior to give excellent color separation, with the only real missing parts of color separation being understandable for the most part, but what is here is quite excellent. It is missing quite a bit of inner frame and things like the arms and torso, but that is to be expected, and the inner frame that is here gives the G-line an excellent range of articulation in at least its unarmored form. In the armor state, it drops significantly, but that was to be expected with any kit that has an optional armor set to mount. In terms of aesthetics then, this is where the G-line falters a little bit. In its base form, not so much. While there are some color inaccurate parts with the kind of divot around where the head Vulcans are, the insides of the thrusters on the backpack, and the sub-thrusters in the sides of the legs not being color accurate, most of that is very understandable for a high grade. I don't think anyone was expecting it to have color separated thrusters or for the little kind of divot inside of the head to be painted in yellow, or to be yellow off the runner. What is a little bit disappointing are the sub-thrusters in the sides of the legs, because as I said earlier, we've seen that before in other kits in things like the D Gundam First, and it came out after this kit, but it's kind of a similar level of like premium UC high grade that I feel like isn't entirely unreasonable to have expected to exist like a year ago when this kit came out, by having a color separated gray part underneath the white armor to give those color separated gray sub-thrusters in the legs. But I'm really kind of quibbling here. Those needing to paint that in isn't the biggest deal, just a drop of gray paint will do the job. Where this kit really struggles in terms of color accuracy, to my opinion, is with the standard armor. Now, while a lot of the parts I also can understand not being color separated, like things like the yellow in the sub-thrusters and the shoulders and the front skirts, parts like the large yellow blocks on the back skirt, and especially on the backpack shroud for the Gatling Smasher, missing all of those bright blue accents, I do think is quite disappointing, and I really wish those had been color separated, because again, those parts are incredibly simple in terms of parts count. They are literally only a couple of parts each, and in the case of the shroud for the backpack for the Gatling Smasher, it is literally 2 pieces. So I really do feel like it was a bit disappointing to miss out on color separation there. But overall, in terms of actual like aesthetic appeal, I think this kit is incredible. I do love the design of the G-line, the way it feels like the gym that the Federation really wanted to make, where it is a simplified, mass-producible version of the Gundam that compromises on performance in no way, that also integrates the, I think it's the FSWS that the full armor Gundam was prototyping, where it has a bunch of modular armor packs that it can mount depending on the situation. I think that's awesome. I do love optional mountable armor packs as like a mobile suit gimmick, as I love full armor variations of kits, so it may also be a bit of a bias towards this kit for me. But I absolutely love the way this kit looks. I love the way the head looks. The only like downside, in my opinion, on this design, again, this is just my opinion, is that I feel like the silhouette and the colors make it look a bit like a football player, with the very large shoulders, the knee pads, and the very like sports helmet-like head. But apart from that, I think aesthetically this is a really interesting kit, and there isn't that much like it. The super high performance Federation Grunt, that's very Gundam-like and very kind of nimble and light in its proportions, despite having all this extra mounted armor. I think the only thing that kind of comes close is like the Jesta cannon. You can let me know if other things are kind of very similar to this in terms of like what I'm talking about for this kind of grunt in the comments below. But in terms of accessories, this kit is essentially perfect. It comes with pretty much everything you would want, coming with a very cool unique beam rifle, coming with a shield, coming with all of the optional armor, your beam sabers, beam saber effect parts, coming with the Gatling Smasher optional equipment, which I think really adds to the look of the standard armor when it's all armored up, and the only thing I really feel is missing is some extra hand option parts, but that's a very common gripe with high grades and not something I'm going to hold against this kit that much. In terms of articulation then, this is where this kit also suffers a tiny bit. In the unarmored state, it is essentially perfect and I have no complaints about it. In the armored state, it does fall apart a little bit, especially in those shoulders. The inability to two-hand the rifle naturally firing in front of it is a really big shame, but I do think the kit looks good enough one-handing the rifle that it's not really that big of an issue, and the articulation in the legs is still good enough that you can get some very cool dynamic poses out of it, like you should be seeing on the screen now, in terms of like a wide-legged grounded pose. So in terms of articulation and posability, I think while the armor does make it suffer a little bit, it is still more than enough for things you would want the G-line to be able to do, and it's still a very capable, posable mobile suit that handles most poses very easily and painlessly. So would I recommend this kit? Honestly, it depends on how much you like the design, because especially for the price, I don't feel like this kit really lives up to that price, especially in terms of color separation. I feel like for the work required, this kit really should be like moderately cheaper than it is. But if you like the design, I would say absolutely go for this kit. There is very little like it in terms of standard releases for high grades you can get that are just as high quality, outside of the color separation, of course. Again, outside of that, I think this kit is nearly perfect, but it's just the price tag that's really holding it back. $40 for this kind of kit is a little bit of a hard sell, but if you're not really the biggest fan of the standard armor, I would say hold off, wait maybe a year for when we're inevitably going to get the assault armor, which in my opinion looks really cool. I love the Gem Striker, so I love that kind of armor set, but if the color separation isn't a big deal and the price isn't that big a deal to you, I would absolutely say get this kit. It is an incredibly interesting and unique addition for your collection. So that was my review of the high-grade G-line standard armor. I was a little bit disappointed with this kit in terms of color separation because, again, of how much good I'd heard about it, but I'm still glad I picked it up. I really love this design, so I'm glad to have it on the shelf, at least for completion's sake, and I'm really looking forward to when they make the assault armor and potentially even the full armor or full custom at some point. But what do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub to the notification bell. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time with my review of the high-grade Huckbind Boxer. I'll see you then.